Hi there, my name is Lee and I am a specialist autism mentor at DeMontfort University. I'm here to talk to you about social anxiety within the context of autism today, how it can manifest and some strategies and tips to help you overcome or manage some challenges that you may face with this. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the contents of today's workshop. So we're going to look at defining and exploring social anxiety. We're then going to look at the three systems of anxiety, as well as some symptoms and physiological responses. We're going to look at anxiety in the context of autism. We're going to visit the illusion of transparency and how we can cognitively restructure ourselves. We're going to look at the effects of avoidance, as well as managing anxiety and managing panic. We're going to look at your sensory environment and also provide some additional tips and links at the end of the workshop. So before we begin to sort of explore ways of addressing social anxiety, we need to understand it and what it is. So hopefully these first few slides will help a little bit with this in terms of understanding differences between different types of anxiety, responses, panic, that sort of thing. So anxiety in itself is a feeling of unease, such as worry or fear that can be mild or severe. Whereas social anxiety or social anxiety disorder or social phobia, you may have heard that term, is a long-term or overwhelming fear of social situations. And a panic attack is a sudden overwhelming feeling of acute and disabling anxiety. So as well as defining what we're talking about here today, I also want you to consider the following three systems of anxiety, both during this presentation and in the future. Anxiety affects us all in different ways, and it is important to recognize how our body is feeling, what behaviors we exhibit, and our thought processes during these periods of anxiety to be able to work on managing things in the future. So to explain in a little more detail, when talking about bodily sensations, we're generally talking about what I've listed here. So things like irregular breathing, churning stomach, sweating, trembling, racing heart, need to visit the toilet more, all these sorts of things that you may well be familiar with at some stage in your life. When we're thinking about behaviors, what you do when you're faced with a situation you fear is really, really important. So we all know this is the fight or flight sort of response. So especially important is the behavior of avoiding the situation. We're going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation. So either not going into the situation at all or getting out of it as quickly as possible. So when we talk about thinking, we're talking about ideas and beliefs. So your mental comments to yourself or your mental pictures about what might happen to you in the situation that you fear, okay? So what are some common symptoms of anxiety? You may be familiar with a number of these, so consider which of these affect you and when they affect you. Perhaps what heightens them? What sort of things, you may be familiar with a number of these. What is it that makes you feel these things, or what brings these symptoms on for you? So the power of communication, planning, and appropriate boundaries are important to lots of autistic people to help manage these feelings. Try not to think just about which of these affect you, but also when they affect you and for what reason. So maybe jot some notes down on each one and think when and where are you experiencing it and why. So you could make a little note of all of these and sort of try and think, even if it's things from the past or past events that you've been to, have a little think about what sort of things, what was the root cause, how were you feeling, how did you react, what was the situation. So it helps you build a little bit of a profile, I suppose, of where your anxiety comes from and what sort of things that you maybe struggle to manage sometimes. So looking a bit further at physiological responses, we've mentioned some of these responses in previous slides. However, it is understandable that the cycle of anxiety will be difficult to break when the way we think about something makes us feel anxious, and then sort of in turn leads to this physiological responses listed here that may provide further concern for you or make it really difficult to regulate ourselves or manage. So these physiological responses can increase our anxiety and generally heighten it through worry. But rest assured, they are likely to be normal responses from our body just trying to protect us. Okay, so these are all quite normal responses to anxiety. Yes, of course, if you're feeling anxious about something and then you're in turn having these physiological responses as well, it adds something extra to deal with, and it make things harder to manage. But just rest assured that this is our body's way of trying to protect us. Okay, so let's look at the link between autism and anxiety and why it is really important to be considering this topic today. So research suggests up to 50% of autistic people are formally diagnosed with anxiety. So that's only including those with a formal diagnosis. Okay, so 1 in every 2 autistic people have a formal diagnosis of anxiety. So some of the most common traits of autism, such as a preference for routine, social communication or interaction challenges, and the need for certainty, have all been found to heighten anxiety. So the double empathy effect and how others perceive autism can also have a huge effect on anxiety if there are communication challenges between autistic people and neurotypical people. And as well as this, overthinking, recognizing social cues, and being able to manage the environment on a sensory level will all have a significant impact on an autistic person's anxiety and social anxiety levels. Okay, so let's put a real life example in as to how we can connect some of the systems of anxiety in terms of how our body reacts and how we think and how our thought processes work. So in case you missed our imposter syndrome workshop, I've included this information again as I feel it's so important to exploring how we respond to feeling anxious. So first we're going to look at the illusion of transparency. So an example of this is we wrongly believe others are aware of our internal states. Okay, so this is basically we overthink the level at which people are recognizing perhaps how nervous or worried or anxious or generally how we're feeling inside. So we might be feeling things internally, but more often than not, only we know how we're feeling. But because of our heightened levels of anxiety and awareness, we are sort of overthinking how much people are actually recognizing this. And you can see this in an example of on the image on the screen here. So this person is on stage delivering some form of speech or talk or presentation. That person feels that the room will view him in a particular certain way, but actually in reality that's not how they feel. They're quite happy and comfortable with what they're watching, but you can see some physiological responses and thought processes coming from himself, that person is generally struggling when actually most people don't see it that way. So the spotlight effect is very similar to the illusion of transparency, but this is where we wrongly think others are aware of how nervous or awkward we look on the outside, which is an example. So we're talking about our internal states with illusion of transparency, but spotlight effect is how we look externally. So again, exactly the same as the illusion of transparency. We genuinely overthink to a really large degree how much people actually recognize how we are feeling or how we are presented. And this can be really damaging for us. So it's a really good thing to be aware of and work on. So the last one is pluralistic ignorance. So have you, for example, ever worried about asking a question in class or perhaps admitting you didn't quite understand instructions? So it is common for us to believe that we are the only ones who feel like they are behind or don't understand something or have a fear of feeling stupid. So despite social anxiety with autism being fairly commonplace in so many of us, please take some reassurance that we are rarely alone in how we feel, and that actually, if you did ask an academic question or someone for example, to repeat instructions, research actually suggests that others might be more likely to be relieved than judgmental, because more often than not, we're all in the same boat. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some steps now that we can take. So we've learned a little bit about some definitions and how it can affect us. But now what we want to do is focus a little bit more on, okay, so we know what's going on to an extent, but how do we start to move forward a little bit or manage things a little bit better? Okay. So when we talk about cognitive restructuring, so these are 6 steps that I feel that you can take here. So when discussing social anxiety in particular, I actually found a resource to help here, which I thought was perfectly put together. 6 excellent steps we can work on to try and improve our engagement socially. Perhaps try to implement 1 or 2 of these factors at a time, as trying to utilize all 6 of them in one go is likely to sort of feel quite overwhelming. Okay, so let's look at them all individually and feel free to make any notes. All right, so number 1, turn total avoidance into small steps. So avoidance, which we will talk a little bit more about later in this presentation, is not always the answer and will not help us improve socially in the long term. So there are times when healthy boundaries and space for yourself are really beneficial for all of us, but picking avoidance as the option for the majority of the time does not actually help us sort of overcome any challenges that we might face with social anxiety. It doesn't allow us to integrate or to make mistakes or expose us to different experiences and allow us to learn from these things. So next time, for example, ask yourself before you avoid something, are there sort of genuine reasons you are avoiding this, or is it just because you are feeling anxious and unsure? So if it is the latter, try to be a bit braver sometimes. Just give things a go a little bit more often. So it's important to take small steps and really gradual steps when doing this so as to not overwhelm yourself by taking on too much too soon. So finding the balance between healthy boundaries and decision making versus giving things a go is something I'm always continuing to work on personally. So my advice here is to play to your strengths. I've seen people brave events for the first time that would have been perhaps totally out of their comfort zone, whether they were feeling anxious or not, which will then heighten the chances of an unsuccessful outcome. So think about what type of activity you like doing. Think about location. Think about the type of people that might be there. Are they like-minded? Think about the time of day. So when do you prefer to socialize, and what do you like doing? So almost build a bit of a profile there you can do. So number 2, we're talking about turning self-evaluation and doubt to mindful attention. So too often we are focusing on how we are feeling or being perceived. So think back to the illusion of transparency and spotlight effect. It is far more important to focus on the occasion or the topic and the people there over our own thoughts. This may help to focus more on the event rather than ourselves and help us to integrate more and decrease our chances of freezing socially. So number 3 is turning scripting into focus and flow. So what we mean by this is to focus less on scripting what you are wanting to say, but focus more directly on the flow of conversation and how you can perhaps impose or integrate yourself in a healthy way on this. So if we attend a social gathering with a particular topic of conversation we are waiting for to crop up, it doesn't actually help us to engage, connect, or even find new interests or opportunities. This can even be, if you're going to perhaps a society or a group that has a particular topic that you're going towards, the flow of conversation may still go outside of what you're expecting it to. So try not to plan too much what you're going to say, and try and integrate by just focusing on the flow of the event or the conversation. So number 4, so try not to answer with, so we're turning closed answers to open-ended chat. So what it's saying here is you don't always have to initiate, and it's okay if it doesn't always work. So some tips here is to try not to answer with single words or answers, all right? So if someone asked you, did you watch, for example, like a particular film or concert, try not to answer with just a yes or no, as this gives the impression that you're not keen on engaging in conversation, even if you feel that you've been perfectly polite and engaged well, which you may well have done. It does give the other person an impression that sort of conversation has come to an end. So try to offer a little bit more, and it is okay if what you offer doesn't receive any further engagement, but it does give the impression that you are happy to be where you are and you're happy to be engaging with this person. So remember, they may also be socially anxious as well. So if we think that perhaps they aren't responding sort of to you very much, that may be because they're socially anxious as well. So number 5, so turn interviewing into self-promotion. So this one can always be a little bit difficult to implement in a variety of social situations, but offering a little more about yourself can often be a good thing. Try not to make the whole conversation about asking questions, and offer a little insight into your own interests, experience and qualities without being overbearing. It gives people a chance to get to know you, and it just lowers your guard just a fraction, just to let people in and allow yourself to be let into sort of conversation and groups. So try not to look too much into how people react when you communicate as well, because this can lead to catastrophizing and overthinking, okay? So we can create stories and assumptions about how we are viewed, which is often not a true reflection and isn't helpful, okay? And number 6, just remember, we all make mistakes, okay? So turn being 100% careful to taking risks, and sometimes just accepting that things go wrong, or we say the wrong things sometimes. Mistakes are okay. We all say the wrong things and get things wrong sometimes. It is often how we respond to doing that which is so much more important, and how we learn and grow as human beings. And we're all unique with different views and life experiences. and it is okay if some social interactions do not quite go as we would have hoped. It is perfectly normal and not something to self-deprecate or catastrophize about. Okay. Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, we're going to look at the potential impacts of avoidance. Okay, um, as we also sort of alluded to, it's actually fine to say no sometimes, and it's absolutely fine to take time to yourself. We all need that time. But if we find and we're honest with ourselves that we are avoiding things quite repeatedly and for reasons almost wholly related to anxiety, here are some of the impacts that this can, cause. So it can prolong the issue. So as we know, in most sort of things in life, the longer we go, the harder it is to undo that. So the more we are avoiding things and the longer we avoid things for, the harder it can actually be to return to them or to make that first step. It can feel even more daunting the longer it happens. It can, of course, lead to loneliness or isolation, and leads to fewer opportunities. If we the more things we say no to and the more things we avoid, the fewer opportunities. That could be educational opportunities, friendship opportunities, employment opportunities, lots of different things, or even just a social event that you would have probably, in hindsight, found quite fun. It does lead to fewer opportunities and therefore missing out on things. Missing out on things that you might have really enjoyed, whether that be a movie at the cinema you might have liked to have gone to, event with friends, lots of different examples we could think of. It can, of course, lead to things like depression, addiction, bad habits, which again can come from loneliness and isolation, which obviously then we're sort of going into the realms of poor mental health or impacted mental health from long-term avoidance of things. And generally as well, not just in life, but in our educational and employment opportunities, it can lead us to feeling less motivated and also procrastinate more. So these are just some things really to consider that are impacts of avoiding things long term. So what we're going to look at here is I've put 5 sort of suggestions together for you. We've talked about the impacts of avoidance and how this can impact us in the long term. But remember, it is okay to sort of say no sometimes and take time for yourself. So if we are worried about how we are perceived when struggling with social anxiety, here are 5 tips for you to consider implementing. Like I said, it's okay to say no, but sometimes we worry about the impacts of, for example, turning down an invite and how our friends might perceive us, or worried about friends becoming more distant from us. So make a note of these 5 tips, as you may find them quite helpful in the future. Okay. So number 1, it is sort of a bit more of a statement than a tip. The other 4 are tips, but the fear sometimes wins if cancelling. Okay, so just remember that the fear sometimes wins, and we don't want the fear to win. We want you to have good life experiences. Okay, so you have overcome anxiety before. Remember that. So sometimes we catastrophize about outcomes and have a complex which can make us believe bad things will happen to us. But think of how many obstacles you have already managed by overcoming anxiety already. It is likely that doing the vast majority of things for the first time will make us anxious. Consider if anxiety is the only reason for avoidance, try to challenge this. Okay. So number 2, I would recommend telling people that explain the battle is yours and it's not about them. So if you're worried about how people perceive you or people feel like you're letting them down, actually explaining to them that the battle is yours and that you have social anxiety and you are doing your best. It's nothing to do with where they've invited you to or how they've gone about things. Explain that the battle's yours and you are working on things and you're trying to get there. And number 3, sometimes simple interactions can feel really, really daunting. Again, this is something you can explain to family, friends, or any other peers, so at least they are aware that this is something that you actually find daunting, and a good friend or a good support network will be understanding of that. Sometimes simple interactions can feel really daunting for you. It's quite simple, and it gives people the chance to actually understand you, and help them put some things in place to perhaps help give you a better experience. So say number 4, that you really are sorry, but sometimes you just can't always be there. And that's okay, you know, that is absolutely okay. Rather than sort of just cancelling and saying, you know, I won't be able to come, be honest and say that you genuinely really are sorry, you want to be there, but sometimes you just can't be, because it feels too much, and going will heighten your anxiety further, and that particular occasion is not. Which leads us on to the last one, which is that you do still appreciate being asked, and you do want to be asked. Who doesn't want to be asked? You know, we all like to feel included in some way, however that way is. We like to be a part of something. So we still appreciate being asked, even if it's perhaps not our cup of tea, or we don't feel okay enough in ourselves to attend. And explain to them that they don't need to actually sort of try and fix anything either, because some people's instincts when they hear these things, like that you feel daunted, or you that you can't be there sometimes, or that you're socially anxious, they feel that they need to sort of try and fix the situation, and they can be a little bit overbearing and actually create more of a spotlight on how you're feeling and you as an individual. So you can explain that they don't need to try and fix it. It's not something that they can fix. Just, you know, that you appreciate them asking you still, being included still, and being there for you. Okay, so that's just some tips for you to help with communication if you're worried about how you're being perceived with social anxiety. So we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety and confidence, because if we are feeling socially anxious, or we feel that, you know, there's things happened in our past, or events have happened in the past that have knocked our confidence, it can be really hard to pick ourselves back up and, you know, try and sort of improve our social anxiety. So just a few tips and pointers here. Just try not to let a bad experience put you off in the future. Remind yourself that one bad experience does not mean this is now sort of something to avoid. Trying to think of a couple of examples. You know, for example, if you were socially anxious and that social anxiety meant that even going to sort of a shopping centre you might find quite difficult. And the one time you decide to get the courage and go to the shopping centre, the fire alarm goes off, and it's really busy and overwhelming. It'd be very easy after that to sort of go, yeah, no, you see, I knew this would happen, something bad would happen, this definitely isn't for me. But actually that's just one of potentially, you know, 20, 30 positive experiences you could have had. So try not to let one bad experience put you off, okay? So start small and play to your strengths. So try to avoid too much too soon, and consider what sort of environment and activity would be suitable. So this is a really good way to build up your confidence. So consider interests and potentially like-minded people. Think of the sort of time of days that you're going to these things, where you're going, how busy is it likely to be. So to sort of build your confidence, you've got to sort of start small and take it little bit by bit, and also play to your strengths, you know. Are you even going to be interested in this event you're going to be doing? So have you got the right positive mindset before you're going? So learning how to cope better and reflect is also really important. So by allowing ourselves to experience different things, we are able to learn and reflect on things, okay? I'll talk a little bit now about pattern recognition with people. That I certainly have it with autistic people, and stamp collecting, you know, and we build this profile of stuff that's happening, and we recognize patterns, and we collect experiences, and we remember how they went. So actually, if you're doing things rarely and have had a couple of bad experiences, you've only really got that to go on. But the more things you give a go, yes, you will still have some negative experiences sometimes. The more positive experiences you've got to build on, and actually the negative experiences allow us to reflect and think of ways we can manage and cope better in the future. I do this with students quite a lot in our mentoring session. We reflect on certain events that perhaps could have gone better, or perhaps we reacted in a way that we wish we didn't, and we think about ways that we can do that in the future. But actually you can't work on that stuff unless you gave things a go. So yeah, just going back to the first point really here. So one incident doesn't define everything. Just please don't give up, you know. It will result in missed opportunities and missed possible friendships, all that sort of thing. And talk through things when they don't go to plan. You know, whether that's with a mentor, a parent, a friend, a therapist, a doctor, whoever it is that you're speaking to at the time. So to talk through things when things don't go to plan, because sometimes they won't, and we have to accept that uncertainty sometimes. So sometimes, despite all the strategies and all what we know about anxiety, these can lead to panic attacks sometimes. So I just want to talk just very briefly to you about some of the signs that a panic attack might be coming on. So we've talked about some physiological responses already, and some of these will feel fairly sort of similar. But so such as breathlessness, sudden instinct for escape, a rapid heart rate, things such as chest contractions and extreme fear as well may be a sign that you're experiencing a panic attack. A lot of people talk about the chest contractions and the tightening of the chest. So as well as that, you can sort of be perspiring or feeling faint or trembling and shaking. And this isn't easy stuff. It's not always easy to consider it to sort of understand whether am I just feeling anxious or is this the early onset of a panic attack. But actually recognizing some of these symptoms and reacting to them early can possibly help us prevent things escalating a little bit. Okay, so this is where we're talking about finding some space, a quiet area, taking some time to yourself to breathe, and we'll have a little look at that on the next slide. So yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit now about managing panic attacks. Okay, so they can be quite scary, can't they? And lots is going on at the time during a panic attack. You might be having some physiological responses that might feel quite overwhelming. There might be a lot of catastrophizing or overthinking going on, maybe struggling to regulate your breathing, something I call the fog, where you can't really see through it and how to get past it, and you can almost feel it escalating without you, and to the point where you sort of don't know where to go, what to do, or how to respond to it. So these are, I suppose, 10 tips or sort of bits of advice. Perhaps write them down in your phone. So if you ever feel like you have a panic attack coming along, or you are actually in the middle of a panic attack, you've got something to refer to, because like I say, when we get the fog, it can be quite hard to regulate and think of a path forward, and how do we react to this, and how do we cope, and how do we calm down. So if you write these 10 sort of things down, it might give you something to work from, for example, if other strategies have failed at that point. So first thing to do is remember that a panic attack isn't dangerous. It might feel, and the symptoms might seem like something more dangerous, but actually a panic attack in itself isn't dangerous. Your body is responding and trying to help you. Okay. Always remember it will soon pass as well. What soon means to each individual is all relative. That could be a few seconds, a few minutes, or even a few hours, but it will soon pass. A panic attack will pass. We've lots of us have had these things, and they pass, not always quickly as we'd like to, and they're not nice to experience, but just remind yourself that however you're feeling now, however strongly you're feeling, those feelings will subside in a short while, and it will gradually feel better. You need to slow down. This is really important. Sometimes when we're panicking and we're anxious and we're flustered, or we're even feeling a little bit manic, we can move quicker, and we can try to do things to actually solve the problem. But actually, sometimes it's more damaging. It's much more important to slow down when you're feeling like you're having a panic attack or extreme levels of anxiety. To slow down, because we can regulate. It's easier to regulate, I guess, when we are moving at a slower pace and taking a bit of time out. Remember, only now matters. Okay, so it's really easy to catastrophize and worry about lots of things, whether they are rational or irrational worries. It can really escalate quite quick in a panic attack, about worrying about cause and consequence, and how you're being perceived, and what's going to happen next, and all these things that start spiraling. But remember, during a panic attack, only right now matters, and regulating your breathing and helping yourself to feel better is the only thing that matters. Nothing else, none of your other worries. Okay. And then when the physiological responses have subsided, then you can start thinking about perhaps the other things and talking through the other things that you were worried about. But during the panic attack, it's just really important to try and regulate. So don't fight the panic. This is important as well. Some people will try and fight back and stop it from coming. Okay, but once it's there, the things that you're better to try and do is find space, monitor it, and breathe. Okay, so when we talk about monitoring and you're in a panic attack, set a timer for 2 minutes. How were you feeling 2 minutes ago compared to now? Set a timer for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever works for you. Okay, so you want to monitor it, because it's a good way of seeing actually, actually recognizing that you are calming down, that we are measuring this and we're seeing our breathing is getting slightly easier, and it can be quite reassuring. So find space, monitor it, and breathe. Also relax your muscles as much as you possibly can. The more we tense, the more that's likely to heighten things as well. So try and really relax yourself. And then after the panic attack has subsided, which it will, we talk about what were you doing, okay? So that's where you reflect. This is where we reflect and we talk about it. And again, that can be shortly after, or it can be days or weeks later with your support network. So this is where we need to consider what were we doing, what impacted it, what were the challenges you were facing at the time, can we think of where the triggers came from. So hopefully that helps a little bit to give you, a little bit of a process to follow if you're struggling with panic attacks. Okay, so I'm only going to very, very briefly talk about this today. So these are some techniques to managing anxiety and preventing panic. So you may be familiar with some or all of these, but what I would recommend is sort of establish some strategies yourself. What works for you? There's no one strategy that anybody can give you that goes, this is the thing that works. This is what will help. We don't know. A lot of these things are trial and error. These are just some of my favorite ones. So grounding techniques, such as 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 techniques. Okay, have a look at it online. So grounding techniques. If you type in grounding techniques 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it will show you exactly how to do it. So hand on heart. Okay, so that's another link there. Which is a really good sort of little 2-minute video to explain how this one can work. Then we've got sort of things like breathing exercises. My favorite is do absolutely nothing for 10 minutes. Okay, so I set a timer on my phone if I'm feeling anxious, if I've got the time, and I will just try and create a circuit break and stop the catastrophizing. Hand to hand I found quite useful, especially with sort of as a calming sensory tool for autistic people. It's where the pressure of 2 hands together can feel quite warming, transferring some of your stress and anxiety and getting some warmth from another person. This is the sort of thing you've got to do with someone you trust. But generally what I will say is, if you would like any more information on these grounding techniques, please drop us an email at autism@dmu.ac.uk and we'll be happy to discuss any of these with you. But generally, there's so many out there. I'll just try things. You've heard lots of things like mindfulness and breathing techniques and grounding techniques and lots of different things like this, okay? But the most important things is to try some things that work for you and see whether they do work or not, because everybody works differently. I know some things definitely don't work for me, some things definitely do work for me, and we're all different. So try and establish some ways to manage your anxiety and prevent panic. So it'll be really important to consider your sensory profile as well in terms of managing social anxiety. So for example, try and consider what works for you and what doesn't before doing something, okay? So it sounds really easy, but too often we try new things that we just aren't comfortable with, and we'll get a negative experience from it, okay? So here are some examples of things to consider, all right? So potential noise levels. How busy is it likely to be? What will the lighting be like? Could you plan, for example, a visit in advance to see what it's like? This is a really, really good tool which I'd recommend to anyone with autism that's socially anxious. So could you plan a visit in advance to see what it's like? So actually planning your route or checking the environment out before you're attending somewhere, or looking online, having a look at some pictures or reviews, lots of different things you can do to try and ease your anxiety so you're not turning up and being blindsided by something. So try and establish if you're feeling extremely socially anxious about something, try and establish as much information as you can as possible without creating an expectation, and it may just ease some of your anxiety. And last but certainly not least is self-regulation. So what we have to remember is, regardless of the amount we try and prepare and the amount we try to sort of attend things we are more comfortable with, there will be times where things will naturally be busy. Lighting will be perhaps overwhelming, noise levels, crowds, lots of different things that we actually may not be able to control despite what we try to put in place. Okay, so how are we self-regulating? So what are you doing for yourself to help? So it's great to plan to do things away from perhaps noise if that's not your cup of tea, or crowds, that sort of thing. But actually, what happens if it was unexpectedly crowded? Are you able to cope in that environment? So these are the things we've got to think about. Whether you like headphones, or some people use stimming items or sensory clothing, or have not so much as an escape plan, but know where they can go where it might actually be a little bit quieter. So there's it's really essential here, I guess, that you build your sensory profile, because you need to know what works for you. So make some notes. And make sure we're planning before we go out as well. These strategies and things we can put in place are no use to us if we are forgetting our headphones, or not taking what we need with us, or not preparing our visits. So planning and preparing really helps us with this sort of stuff. So some final tips just to sort of get towards closing off the session today. So as we've mentioned, start small and play to your strengths. Okay, don't compare yourself to others. Okay, it's a very unhealthy thing to do. So it's just something to limit. Okay, try not to overthink about how others perceive you. So we talked about the illusion of transparency, the spotlight effect, all that sort of thing. Keep writing things down. Okay, you've got to build some sort of profile for yourself, or some strategies, or some ways of reflecting on things, and perhaps even if it's just with yourself, reflecting on how you could do things differently in the future. Okay, so it's important to keep reflecting and writing things down about this stuff. Reach out regularly to your support network. Okay, they are there for you, whether that's however your support network looks. Make sure you're reaching out to them if you're struggling. Okay, and remember the 5 tips we talked about with that, where we could be just a little bit more honest sometimes about exactly why perhaps we're not always able to be there. If you're really struggling, just call or text someone that you trust or know well, or that you really get on with. You could go for a walk, write your thoughts down, read a book, and seek support through signposting, GP, all that sort of thing as well. So there's some more just general tips thrown in there. I know we've worked on some actual strategies and things, but these are just some general tips. So I like to keep lists, for example, of things that are good for me, and things that I'm looking forward to, and things I can refer to when I'm struggling a little bit. So just feel free to add a few of those to your sort of list if you wanted to do something like that. So just to summarize the session, it's quite hard to summarize it in just a few bullet points, as we've covered quite a lot today, but I think 4 really key things that I wanted to get across to you was that physiological responses to panic and anxiety may feel scary, but more often than not, it's just your body's way of trying to protect you. So try to consider and challenge your reasons for avoidance due to social anxiety. Avoidance can lead to isolation and missed opportunities. So we generally overthink and catastrophize over how much others perceive and recognize our thoughts and emotions. So that's going back to the illusion of transparency, the spotlighting effect, all that sort of thing. Okay. And try to be transparent with others about being socially anxious, and gradually implement the cognitive restructuring steps to help you with social anxiety. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for watching. I hope you found today's sort of session useful. If you have any questions about it, or you'd like any more information on today's session, please email us. We've got all our details on there at autism@dmu.ac.uk. Please follow us on our Instagram channel as well, if you want to keep up with all the things that we get up to, and all our resources, events, socials, that sort of thing. We also have a podcast channel. There's about 20 episodes on there, covering lots of topics such as this, especially for new students at DMU. And then there's a few other bits of information there, such as our library services, our wellbeing services, and our Healthy DMU Hub, and where we're located. But until next time, thank you so much for watching this, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.